It is my favourite time of the year in the garden, and that is time to start planting tomatoes, which is why I'm here at Athol Road Primary School. One of their teachers, Bryan Hunter, has developed the most ridiculously amazing farm. He's got so much more experience at growing tomatoes than I do. So yes, he's going to give us a full tour. That's for another video. Right now, he's going to teach us everything you need to know about growing tomatoes. We are going to cover off watering, feeding, pruning, staking, pests, diseases, how to get rid of them, and how to make sure you get the most delicious tomatoes this season.
We're going to put the main block of that into there, and then we're going to put all of this under the ground. But I would still probably remove some of these bottom leaves and probably plant it up to that depth.
Bryan, this garden is absolutely ridiculous.
Okay, thank you.
Tell me you didn't do all this by yourself.
Oh, no, look, this is something that's evolved over 12 years since we started the Environmental Ed program. I'm lucky that I have time during the week on a Monday and Friday to work in the garden, but also students do a lot of it, and we do have a couple of volunteers that come in and help out. So there's many hands that work in the garden.
I want you to give me a crash course in tomatoes, because everyone in Melbourne is starting to think about planting tomatoes. In other parts of Australia, they've probably already got them in the ground.
Yeah, we're still getting some cold snaps, so people are still a bit wary. Is it time? So,
well, let's start with that. When is time?
Oh, look, spring is a good time to sort of think about it, depending on the weather. I mean, tomatoes is something you can produce a lot of as seed anyway, so you can probably get started, end of September, coming into it now, and have a go. And if some get hit by some frost or cold, you should have a few in reserves.
If you are starting from seed,
yes.
When do you start?
Oh, look, you can do it through winter if you've got somewhere warm and sheltered to get those seeds going. You don't need to have a greenhouse. You can make your own little ones, soft drink bottles over a little punnet, keeping it warm, keeping it watered. Anywhere up on a window ledge as well, bit of sunshine, bit of warmth, they'll take off from, middle of winter.
So this is your greenhouse?
Yeah. So you can see there's a few different tomato varieties. They're starting to get a little bit leggy now. We can see a few starting to put on their true leaves. So that's why these guys haven't been planted yet. They have only got these two single leaves. Some have started on the next set, and that's what we're waiting for. We're waiting for those two sets of two. Once we've got that, on a day like today, we might actually sit them out here for the day, getting some sunshine. But we just leave the doors open during the day, let the airflow start to come through so they can start to get that feeling of movement. Now they've probably got another week or so, and then they'll start hardening off and we'll find a home for them.
So you could get them into the ground much smaller than the ones that I've shown
you can,
today.
yeah. As long as they've got their true leaves and you've given them a bit of time to harden off, they should be fine.
And the true leaves are not these green things, it's the first things growing.
Yeah, there's only a couple,
middle.
so there's one like there that's just starting to get its second set there.
Yep.
So they're only just beginning. These ones, we could either move them out, give them their own pot for a week or two, or they would be all right going into the garden.
In terms of getting it into the ground?
Yep.
Is there any sort of specific... I've got Luce here who feels like she's missing out, so I'm actually going to grab her and she can hang out with us. She can be the
star of the show.
Yep. My mother-in-law always says Cup Day is the planting day for tomatoes in Melbourne.
Yeah, look, let's not get talking about climate change and everything else, but the seasons are changing. Yeah. But this isn't about that. So the 12 years that I've been doing this, I've seen huge changes in when to start planting things, and when you could harvest things in the past are now taking longer further down a season. So yeah, that old saying would still work. You're just going to get a harvest later than usual. Some people are planting right on the end of winter and are getting through and getting a nice harvest before Christmas, So
chuck a few in early, save a few inside maybe,
yeah.
And stagger them.
Well, I mean, from a tomato, you can get, 20, 30, 40 seeds out of a tomato and dry them off on paper towel. And that's what I get my kinder kids to do.
That's where this one came from.
Exactly. So for something so inexpensive, you can do it big, have a lot, and trial and error. You might lose some from planting too early, you might not, and they're the ones that could take off for you. So
when you're planting tomatoes into the ground, what do we need to know about soil?
Soil, feed it up. So you want some organic compost in there, or any sort of compost would be good. You could put some manures in there, chicken, sheep, cow. tomatoes really like potassium, so sulphate of potash. You can mix a bit in, but I like to, when I've actually planted it, just sprinkle a little bit around it to help get it started. But the soil itself, as long as it's got lots of nutrient value in it, that's a good way to get your plant started.
So just say someone's got a garden bed that they used last year, they're wanting to amend the soil. What are 3 things you'd add to it right now before you get your tomatoes in?
Okay, so something like 1 square metre here, I'd be putting half a bag of compost in there, and that can be a mushroom compost or another type of compost. I'd probably put half a bag of chicken manure in there as well. Bit of blood and bone as well. Sprinkle that through, mix them in. They're probably the 3 things that I would add to get that soil up to where it needs to be.
What sort of space do we need to keep in mind?
Well, it depends on your tomato. If you've got a small bush tomato or one that's going to grow tall, they both probably need, around 1 metre spacing. So for this bed, we might only put 1 in here. I mean, something like that, you think, gee, that's a lot of space, but this is going to get big, it's going to spread, and it's going to grow. So, if you want to play your luck, you could probably put 2 into a bed this size. But usually between sort of 1/2 metre to 1 metre spacing between tomatoes.
That's a lot.
Well, it sounds like a lot, but they get big.
And what's the downside of having them too crowded?
Airflow. One of the common problems for tomatoes. Do you want to pause?
No, let's press on. You don't mind getting wet,
One of the common problems is black spot. Okay, that's caused by 2 main things, getting water on the leaves and not enough airflow.
What do you do if you do get black spot?
You need to remove those leaves that are affected by black spot. You need to take them off and take them right away because it's a fungal one. You can't just drop it on under the plants, it'll stay there. So clear as much of it as you can. You'll probably get more as you go along. You just got to try and stay on top of it. You've really got to limit getting the plant wet. Obviously it needs water, but try and get that water onto the soil rather than the plant. So
water the ground, don't water the leaves.
That's the one.
So I've got a couple of seedlings here. This one is a tomato black cherry.
It's probably a bit big for its pot now, as you can see. It's got part of its root hanging out there. But tomatoes are very resilient, so even though it looks a bit ragged, probably see some signs of black spot forming on some of these leaves as well anyway. But all that can be rectified, and we can make this into one of the strongest tomatoes in the garden. So,
all right, show me how you do that.
What we're going to do, instead of just planting it to sort of the base of the plant here, we're actually going to plant most of this stem under the ground.
Now, people at home want to see your beautiful face, Bryan.
Oh, sorry, sunshine. It's just a habit with the sunglasses. But what we're going to do is we're going to remove a lot of these bottom leaves, and we're actually going to plant it under the ground up to where my fingers are. It might sound a bit extreme, but what that'll do, all these nodules where these leaves are coming out will actually sprout their own roots, and it'll actually anchor this tomato plant better in the ground rather than just this. So first things first, we will remove some of these smaller ones. Being small, we can pinch them off. People probably say you should use secateurs, and you can, but I'm just going to remove that. I'm also going to take this last one off, and it might make the plant look pretty bare, but as I said, we're going to be planting most of this under the ground. So
if they were healthy leaves, would you still take them off?
Probably not. But as we saw, we got the black spot on that one, so we're removing that all the way out. Getting it out of the pot, pretty straightforward. Give it a bit of a squeeze, turn it upside down. Okay, you can see it's got plenty of rootstock already growing in there. I'm just going to use my hands. You can use a trowel. And because we want to plant most of this stem, I'll start at this point and sort of come across the garden here. We're going to put the main block of that into there, and then we're going to put all of this under the ground. So we're left with just the very small part of that tomato.
If that wasn't a crooked tomato, would you still plant it on the side?
Well, looking at one of your other ones here, I would still probably, no, wouldn't plant on the side, but I would still probably remove some of these bottom leaves and probably plant it up to that depth for the same reason. Those nodules will then produce their own roots, make it a much stronger plant anchored in the ground. So with that one, because it had such a leggy stem, that's why we've put most of that stem under there. But for something like this, I'd still put another probably 5 centimetres of that stem under the ground as well. Okay, not all plants like having their stem buried, but tomatoes are the exception to the rule.
You mentioned earlier that some tomatoes are bushes and some will vine. Is that determinate versus indeterminate?
That is correct, yes.
And which is which?
Determinate is your bush, and indeterminate will be your vine that will keep going up, 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 up.
So on some of my seeds that I planted, it didn't say whether they were determinate or indeterminate.
They won't.
So how do you know?
That's a good question. If it's coming with a tag, it should tell you what it's going to grow to. So this one is 1.5 to 2 metres, so this is indeterminate. It will actually reach for the sky. But usually in the label, it should actually let you know whether it's a bush variety or whether it's going to grow up. But not always the case, especially if you're growing seeds from tomatoes that you've harvested off something else. I basically treat most of my tomatoes as indeterminate. Okay, so I'm going to stake them and I'm going to make them go up as much as possible. They'll eventually.
I guess a way to remember that, determinate means it'll stop at a certain size.
That's right. It's determined to get to that point, whereas indeterminate, you go, I'm just going to keep going.
Great, because I can never remember which is which. And looking at this, there's no way to tell which it is. Is that right?
No. I mean, you compare it to your other tomatoes, they're all very similar. A few different shades of colours, but of green, but they're all very similar. So I would treat them all as indeterminate and see how you go.
Lucy, I reckon, will nearly fall off to sleep.
Yeah, she's blinking away.
As we were just discussing, if I don't press on with her, I don't film anything. So I reckon she'll be nice, quiet and relaxed now, hopefully. Yeah. But we need to talk about watering.
Yes.
Do you water tomatoes just like any other plant?
Well...
Other than avoiding the leaves?
Yeah, so any new plant you want to give it a good water in just to get all those air bubbles out of the soil. I use a power feed, so it's some sort of seaweed solution or Charlie Cart, one of those brands, just to get it established. And all the shock we've just put into that plant of removing all those leaves and stuff and burying them under the ground, that helps treat the shock. So,
and what is it in there?
So this one's a seaweed-based one. Okay, the power feed brand.
So would any other seaweed solution do the same trick?
Yep. At this stage in the planting, we want to just deal with the shock of what we've just done to the plant. Yep. So that's going to help settle the plant in. It's also going to encourage a lot of new root growth, especially from those little nodules we've just created on the stem that we've buried under the ground. So
great.
First one, I would always give it some sort of seaweed solution to get it set up, and then you can do your general watering from there. But this is a good idea to keep doing this, once every 2 weeks. At this stage, it's a bit tricky to sort of not get the leaves wet going around it, being such a small plant. But it's always best to try not to get it on the leaves. So you're not going to drown the plant either. So especially in these food cubes, all this liquid's going to make its way down to the reservoir at the bottom anyway. So
in coming days,
yep,
weeks, months, how often would you water and how do you know when they need a water?
Well, again, it depends on the weather. I mean, if we're going to get rain, that'll do most of the job for you. But I would be watering if we're getting just dry weather like this every couple of days. These are going to be dry on the surface anyway, but the first centimetre or two down, we want to get a bit of moisture in there. So these are still quite moist in this soil anyway, so that'll be fine. If we get some sort of warmer days, that moisture should dry up pretty quick, so that's when you want to start watering in. So probably every 2 to 3 days while it's still young, just keep the water up to it.
Just turning the camera around for a second because we've had success.
Yes. Ta-da.
They're so cute when they're sleeping, aren't they? She's pretty cute when she's awake too.
We're encouraging this plant to sort of go for the sky. A couple of different staking options available to you. We've got these tomato cages. A lot of people make the mistake of installing them this way over the plant when it's actually, these pins are actually going down into the ground. I've got these tubes in the way, but basically coming down without skewering your plant right over the top.
Do you find those tall enough?
Well, no, this is the other problem. They will support it to a certain point, but that can lead you to whatever stake system you're planning on using. So we do use these a lot. You can actually put in some quite high stakes above the cage and actually run some strings down, and you can actually get your main stem to follow up the strings to that point. It depends how much effort you want to put into actually getting this plant to grow as tall as possible. Getting it to the size of the cage, you're still going to get a bumper crop from that if you're doing the ongoing maintenance that it requires. So it just depends how high you want to go, I guess. Another tomato stake one here is just this plastic one. It's just a triangular cage, same deal. That would spear down over the top of the tomato plant. You can have these support bars or whatever height you want, using that to help push out the branches and guide that along. But again, you can see it's a bit taller than this cage, so you're going to get a bit more height out of these. And then the good old traditional, well, these ones are bamboo stakes, but your wooden stakes. Again, you can do 3 or 4. You want a square or a triangle system, and then string on from there. So
I've often just done one. Would you not recommend
well,
that?
you can. Having the one stake will be fine because you can use that to guide the main stem up. But then all your other branches coming off, there's no support for them. So I would always sort of surround the plant with either stakes or a cage to get it up there. With these 3, I'd probably just come out in a triangle fashion. Just to that point. You can add string through them as they're coming up as well. Anything's going to work as long as that tomato has some sort of support. So with the strong winds and everything else, it's going to be supported from all that strong wind.
Now, one thing I didn't ask you earlier, do you tend to plant your tomatoes straight away or do you harden them off?
Well, our greenhouse, we've actually got quite a lot of tomatoes in there. So we're waiting for the true leaves to come through. Once they've got 4 leaves, they're true leaves, then we'll start hardening them off. And that can be just a process of opening up the doors to our greenhouse to let some of that natural airflow for an hour or 2 to go through. If it's a nice day, we'll bring them out for the day and put them back at the end of the day in case we get another cold night.
Can you explain to people what I mean by hardening off?
If it's growing inside an enclosed environment, it's like, I guess you're babying it, it's like wrapped in cotton wool. So you're not going to just throw it straight out into the open once it's got those true leaves, because it could be any sort of elements that it's exposed to, and it can actually stress the plant. Yeah, it needs to toughen up slowly. You need to introduce it slowly. Otherwise it could wilt like a little flower and have some problems with it further on.
So I made that mistake when I was transplanting some of these tomatoes.
Yep.
I actually left them outside accidentally overnight, and you can see these leaves are now looking really ugly.
Yeah.
To begin with, I thought that's a disease until I realised it was only on the ones that I'd left outside.
Yeah, and they're a bit droopy, so they're a bit stressed at the moment. And tomatoes are pretty resilient, as I said earlier. They'll most likely bounce back anyway. They might just need a bit of a trim and a tidy up, and maybe a dose of the power feed as well, just to give them a bit of a boost.
I've heard of people putting fans into their greenhouses.
Yes, yeah.
Have you ever tried that?
No. I've got enough on my hands here to run an extension cord down to our greenhouse and run fans in there. But
so you can do it, but it's not necessary.
Look, opening up the doors, letting a bit of breeze through each couple of days should be enough. And then on really nice days, bringing them out, that should be enough as well, just to give them that exposure that they need before they come out into the big leagues.
So they're in the ground.
Yep.
What next?
Well, obviously you're hoping they're going to get up there and start growing, and they're going to put on a lot of new branches as they get taller. As it gets taller, I'd be removing a lot of the lower branches. Okay, we want to allow airflow to be able to pass under there, probably 30 centimetres. Anything under that I'd be removing just to allow airflow to get under the plant. I just want to encourage the top growth where it's going to start to put the flowers on, and that's where you're going to get your fruit. The other thing is, on most of the joins you'll get another little branch that comes out here called a lateral. I remove all those as well.
How do you spot a lateral?
So basically you've got your stem, your plant branch coming out here. Right in that little groove there, you'll get another little stem plant branch growing out of there. And that will happen all the way up on each of those branches that come out. You should get a lateral growing out of there until it gets to the point where your little flower heads will start growing out of those little V sections.
Why do you remove those?
Otherwise you're going to get too bushy, less airflow, and it's going to take away from the areas that are going to produce the fruit. We want to encourage these ones growing out, removing these ones until we get up to our flowers. And obviously we're going to leave our flowers then. If you're getting flowers quite early on while the plant's still young, you can actually remove the flowers as well if you want to encourage the growth of the actual plant. So you might decide too early for tomatoes, let's pick off those flowers and let that plant continue to grow bigger and bigger and stronger, and then wait for the next lot of flowers to pop up.
And the flowers are self-pollinating, aren't they? Is that right?
They can be, yep. Especially on windy days, it's all going to pollinate through. Look, bees love tomato flowers as well. We're lucky we've got 2 beehives on site here, so they
You
help
have to
us
show
out a
me
lot.
them in a minute.
Yeah, but yeah, they can self-pollinate quite easily.
Okay, fertilising?
As I said, power feed some sort of seaweed solution every couple of weeks. They love potassium, so sulfate of potash is something you can introduce, especially once it produces flowers. You want to give it a good dose of that sulfate of potash.
So if you feed it when the flowers come out, that's basically going to put the energy towards the flowers.
Exactly right, yeah. It's going to pull that specific potassium nutrient out of the soil and push that into the flowers to create the tomato that you want. So, you know, there's tomato-based fertiliser as well. There's tomato dust. There's all sorts of things that you can use to help protect and help it grow. But sulfate of potash, sea salt solution, they're my go-tos for our school garden.
So some other problems people might have with their tomatoes, if they're noticing the leaves are looking yellow, what's that a sign of?
Well, that's probably similar nutrient potassium deficiency. So there are special formulated pelletized tomato fertiliser you can buy, and that would be a good easy kick. But just your sea salt is going to put that nutrient back in as well. So as long as you're doing it on a regular basis, and that's the other thing, tomatoes don't like irregular watering. So you get into a routine of watering on the certain time frame, that's what they prefer. They know when the water's coming. Once you start mixing and matching, and that's where rain also impacts our plants because it's irregular watering, that's when you can get split in the fruit and stuff like that. So it can be tricky, but yeah, best things you can do is water on the certain times you're going to water and try not to do it outside of that. If it's going to be a 40-degree summer day, then you might be introducing a bit more water in that sense, but they like the hot weather, so they're pretty hardy plants in that respect. You can companion plant with tomatoes.
I was going to ask you that, yes. What grows well with tomatoes?
Basil. Basil's really good to plant around the edges of your tomato plant.
And to eat with
Yeah,
tomatoes.
well, there you go. Well, you got tomatoes and your basil, you can make your own
Tomatoes
pizzas now.
and basil,
But a flower, marigold flower, is also a good bug deterrent, so a pest deterrent. So marigolds are very nice to plant, gives you that pop of colour as well. So basil and marigold would be the 2 I'd recommend to plant amongst your tomato plants as well.
Do you net your tomatoes?
We have certain varieties the birds prefer,
Yeah.
so we do actually net certain varieties. I find that, like your black Russian and black cherry, the birds don't attack them.
Because they don't recognise the colour.
Well, yeah, it's the colour.
Yeah.
So the darker, the black, purple tomato.
Do you know what? I had the same thing happen last year in that they loved my red tomatoes but wouldn't touch the yellow ones.
There you go. Yeah, same thing, because they're just sensed to that red colour. So, yeah. So that's interesting as well. So if you want to sort of avoid the birds altogether, just go for a black or a purple.
If you're new to this channel, I record vegetable garden tours in Melbourne, Australia at least every month. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And also if you could hit the like button, that helps other people find this video.